It lasted less than 3 seconds. In the grand scale of a 9-inning baseball game, 3 seconds is nothing. It is the time between a pitch being called and the catcher returning the ball. It is the time between a manager stepping out of the dugout and the umpire walking toward him. It is barely enough time to register as a moment at all. But when Shohei Ohtani hit his first home run of the 2025 season and then, in that brief window between contact and the beginning of his trot, tilted his head back and looked directly up at the sky, those 3 seconds became the most discussed moment in baseball for the next 48 hours. People noticed immediately. How could they not? The crowd was already in full eruption. The ball was already gone. Everything around Ohtani was noise and motion and the specific electricity that only a home run in a meaningful moment can generate. And in the middle of all of that, he went still and looked up. Not at the ball. The ball was long past tracking. Not at the crowd. Not at the dugout where his teammates were already celebrating. He looked up at something that was not there, or perhaps at something that only he could see. The cameras held on his face for a moment longer than they normally would, because whoever was directing the broadcast understood instinctively that this was not routine. This was a window into something private happening in a very public place. And then Dave Roberts, the Dodgers manager, a man who has spent more time watching Shohei Ohtani up close than almost anyone in the world, was asked about it after the game. What he said stopped the press room entirely. I wonder if Shohei was thanking God. He did not say it as a joke. He did not say it as a deflection or a piece of colorful managerial poetry designed to fill a post-game quote. He said it with the quiet sincerity of a person who has watched someone closely enough to believe it might simply be true. And in that one sentence, the conversation about Ohtani's 3 seconds looking at the sky expanded into something far larger than baseball. Today, we are going to explore exactly what those 3 seconds meant, what Roberts saw that made him say what he said, what the people closest to Ohtani understand about the private faith and gratitude that quietly drives the most public athlete in the world, and why a manager's simple, honest observation touched something in millions of people who heard it. Because this story is not really about a home run. It is about what a person does with a moment of grace. Before any conversation about what Ohtani's skyward look meant can happen honestly, it is worth establishing something that gets lost in the avalanche of statistics and records that surround his name. Shohei Ohtani is, before anything else, a deeply private person. This is not a complaint or a criticism. In a sports media landscape that rewards constant access, relentless content, and the performance of personality as much as the performance of skill, Ohtani's privacy is genuinely remarkable. He gives what the professional obligations of his position require. He is respectful, composed, and never dismissive in his interactions with media and the public. But the interior life, the values, the beliefs, the things that actually drive him when the lights are off and the work is just work, he keeps largely to himself. What this means is that every small window into who Ohtani actually is carries unusual weight. Because those windows are rare, and because he is not performing for them, what they reveal tends to be real. The 3 seconds looking at the sky was one of those windows. And the people who have watched Ohtani most closely, teammates, coaches, the small circle of people who interact with him daily beyond the professional requirements of baseball, were not entirely surprised by it. Because they have seen versions of that gesture before. Not always looking at the sky. Sometimes in the quiet before batting practice. Sometimes in the stillness after a difficult game. Sometimes in the way he sits alone with his thoughts in moments that other players fill with noise and distraction. There is something operating inside Ohtani that goes deeper than competitive drive or professional discipline. Something that most athletes, even exceptional ones, do not carry in the same way. A quality of inner orientation that the people around him can feel without always being able to name precisely. Roberts named it. And whether his specific word, God, is literally accurate or simply the closest word available for something that resists easy description, the observation underneath it was genuine and grounded in years of close observation. Dave Roberts has managed Shohei Ohtani for 2 seasons now. He has watched him prepare, perform, struggle briefly, and produce historically. He has been in the same buildings, the same dugouts, the same pre-game environments as Ohtani for hundreds of days. That kind of sustained proximity teaches you things about a person that no statistical analysis and no media profile can capture. You begin to understand not just what a person does but why they do it. The motivation behind the behavior. The values organizing the choices. What Roberts has observed in Ohtani, and what comes through in every comment he makes about him that goes beyond the purely technical, is a person whose relationship to his own success is fundamentally different from most elite athletes. Most elite athletes, at the highest level of professional sport, carry some version of the same core drive. Call it ego, call it competitive fire, call it the need to prove something, whatever its specific form, it is ultimately oriented inward. The achievement belongs to me. The record is mine. The moment is something I earned and I own. This is not a criticism. That inward orientation is often exactly what drives exceptional performance. The hunger to claim something for yourself, to stand somewhere and say I did this, is one of the engines of greatness in competitive sport. But Ohtani's orientation is different. Roberts has observed this consistently and spoken about it in various ways across multiple seasons. The achievement, for Ohtani, does not seem to land as something personal and possessed. It seems to land as something received, something to be acknowledged with gratitude rather than claimed with pride. That distinction is subtle but profound. And it is the distinction that explains both the prayer pose and the skyward look and Roberts' instinct that what he was witnessing in those 3 seconds was a man offering thanks rather than a man celebrating himself. Here is something that rarely appears in the mainstream coverage of Shohei Ohtani. People who have been close to him, people who have traveled with him, eaten with him, shared the unglamorous daily routine of a professional baseball season with him, consistently describe a person for whom something like faith is genuinely present in daily life. Not loudly. Not performatively. Not in the way that athletes sometimes invoke religion as a public relations gesture or a convenient explanation for success. Quietly. Consistently. In the same way that his dietary discipline and his preparation routines are present, not as performances but as the actual organizing principles of how he moves through each day. His background is Japanese, and Japan's relationship with religion is complex and plural in ways that make simple Western categories difficult to apply. The country's spiritual culture draws from Shinto and Buddhist traditions in ways that are often deeply interwoven with daily life without being formally religious in the Western sense. The sense of gratitude toward forces larger than oneself, toward nature, toward ancestors, toward the circumstances that made a moment possible, runs through Japanese culture in ways that are real even when they are not explicitly named. Whether Ohtani's skyward look in that moment came from a specific faith tradition, from a more general spiritual orientation, or simply from the profound gratitude of a person who has worked extraordinarily hard and understands viscerally that hard work alone does not guarantee the outcome, the effect was the same. He looked up. He acknowledged something beyond himself. And for 3 seconds, in the middle of 50,000 people watching him, he was somewhere private. Roberts saw it. And he said what he saw. There is something important about the specific person who made this observation. Dave Roberts is not a man given to spiritual speculation about his players. He is a baseball manager, practical, tactically focused, deeply experienced in the professional realities of a long season and all the management challenges it brings. His post-game comments are typically measured and professional. He praises performance, acknowledges challenges, speaks carefully about personnel decisions. When Roberts says something that steps outside those professional categories, when he reaches for a word like God in the middle of a standard post-game press conference, it is worth paying attention. Because it means that what he observed exceeded the available professional vocabulary. He was not trying to make a theological statement. He was not inserting his own beliefs into the conversation. He was simply describing, as accurately as he could, what he saw in his player's face during those 3 seconds. And the fact that the word he reached for was gratitude expressed upward, towards something beyond the moment, beyond the stadium, beyond the game itself, says something important about the quality of presence he observed. The press room was quiet after he said it. Not uncomfortably quiet. The kind of quiet that falls when something true has been said simply, and the people in the room need a moment to let it settle. Several reporters later described it as one of the most unexpectedly moving things they had heard in a post-game press conference. Not because of the word Roberts chose, but because of the obvious sincerity behind it, a manager who had watched closely enough and cared enough to notice something real, and who trusted it enough to say it plainly. Once you see the skyward look through Roberts' framing, you begin to notice that it is not an isolated gesture. It is part of a larger, consistent pattern in how Ohtani carries himself through the moments that matter most. The prayer pose that appeared after key home runs in previous seasons. The brief stillness at the plate after significant hits that others have described as something beyond simply processing the moment. The way he interacts with opposing players after remarkable exchanges, not with the pumped-up energy of a competitor who has won a battle, but with the quieter acknowledgement of someone who understands that something special just happened and wants to honor it properly. All of these gestures point in the same direction. They point toward a person who experiences success not as conquest but as gift. Who understands, in a way that his discipline and his work ethic make even more meaningful, not less, that the outcome of all that preparation is never fully in his control. He can control what he eats. He can control how he prepares. He can control the quality of his focus during an at-bat. He cannot control whether the ball finds the gap, whether the timing is perfect, whether the moment cooperates with the preparation. When it does, when all the invisible work meets the visible result, Ohtani's response is not to claim it. It is to receive it. To look up for 3 seconds and acknowledge, in whatever private language that gesture speaks, that something beyond him was part of what just happened. That orientation, that fundamental humility in the face of success, is perhaps the most counterintuitive thing about the greatest player in baseball. And it may be the most important thing about him. There is one more dimension to Roberts' comment that deserves attention. The fact that a manager would say something like that publicly, would step outside the professional framework of post-game analysis to speak honestly about something he observed in his player's private moment, reveals something about the relationship between them. Managing Ohtani is not a simple professional assignment. It is a relationship with a person of extraordinary complexity, a person whose gifts are unprecedented, whose preparation exceeds anything the organization has previously encountered, and whose inner life operates at a depth that most professional relationships never reach. Roberts has navigated that relationship with consistent respect and genuine admiration. He has never reduced Ohtani to a set of abilities to be deployed. He has always spoken about him as a person first, as someone whose character is as remarkable as his talent, and whose presence in the organization means something beyond what appears in the box score. The comment about God was an expression of that relationship. Not an intrusion into Ohtani's privacy. A respectful acknowledgement, from a man who has watched closely, that what he saw in those 3 seconds was something worth naming. And in naming it, Roberts gave the rest of us permission to see it too. The home run itself was spectacular. A first home run of the season always carries weight, and this one, a powerful, authoritative drive that reminded everyone in the stadium exactly who they were watching, carried more than most. But the 3 seconds after the contact were something else entirely. In those 3 seconds, Ohtani was not performing for the crowd. He was not managing his image or calculating the moment's narrative value. He was doing something entirely personal, something that would have looked exactly the same whether 50,000 people were watching or none. He looked up. He was grateful. He acknowledged something beyond himself in the way that felt most natural and most honest to him. And Dave Roberts, who has stood close enough for long enough to understand what he was seeing, said the only true thing there was to say. I wonder if Shohei was thanking God. 7 words. No elaboration needed. No further explanation required. Because everyone who heard it, everyone who had seen the 3 seconds, everyone who has watched Ohtani closely enough to understand that the person behind the player is as extraordinary as the player himself, understood exactly what Roberts meant. And felt, perhaps unexpectedly, the same thing the manager felt standing in that dugout watching his player look at the sky. Something quiet. Something real. Something that baseball, at its very best, occasionally gives you access to, not in the statistics or the records or the endlessly updated rankings, but in 3 unscripted seconds when the greatest player in the world forgets the crowd entirely and simply says thank you. That is the moment that will last from this night. Long after the season ends and the statistics are filed away, that image will remain. A man. A home run. 3 seconds looking at the sky. And a manager honest enough to tell us what he saw.